I'm Susie Dillinger, and today I'm going to show you how to do wool applique whip stitch by machine. So I teach wool applique, a lot of Sue Spargo stuff. Here's a block that I have almost completed. And the fun part is all the embroidery stitches that you do after you've tacked down all the wool pieces onto the background. Well, the boring part is tacking all the wool pieces down, and it's rather time consuming. So I've discovered a way to do it on machine and make things go faster, get to the fun part faster. So let's talk about supplies that you will need. The thread that I use is the exact same thread that you would use if you were doing it by hand. So if you're doing Sue Spargo applique or any other wool applique at the present, you probably already have some of this thread. This thread is called Illana, E-L-L-A-N-A. It's a wool and acrylic blend thread, and it's made by the Aurifil thread company. You'll want to have colors that match your wool pretty closely so it's not visible. You don't want to use the Illana thread in your bobbin. You want to use a small skinny thread for your bobbin thread since that top thread is so bulky. What I usually use is the Aurifil cotton 50 weight thread, which I use for traditional piecing. You can also use the bottom line from Superior Threads or any other skinny thread that you have. Again, the color should match the color of the thread that you have in the top. You're going to need an open toe foot for your machine. If you have a Bernina, it's foot number 20. And the last thing that you'll need for supplies is some hand quilting thread that has the waxed finish so that it's rather stiff. And this is what I use to thread that fuzzy thread through the needle. And I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. Okay, so that's our supplies. So how do we set up our machine for using this heavier fuzzy wool thread? Well, the first thing you're going to have to do is loosen your top tension a bit. Secondly, we're going to be using the zigzag stitch. So you're going to set your machine for zigzag, and I set mine with the length of the stitch at 3 millimeters and the width of the stitch at about 1.6 millimeters. This is for the larger pieces that I do. You can also do really small pieces, and when I do small pieces, I set the zigzag a little bit smaller and tighter for those small pieces. So I set the length at about 1.2 millimeters and the width at about 1.1 millimeter when I'm doing tiny pieces. Okay, so today I thought I would show you on this little bird block how I can do the zigzag stitch and make this blend in really nicely and look just as good as the hand stitch does. Now I've got some pieces just laying on here right now because I wanted you to see what the finished block will look like. Obviously it won't have an eye and feet and all the embroidery stitches, but you'll be able to get a good idea of what this block is like. So I'm going to start with the pink. So I'm going to take off my extraneous pieces here. And usually I do lay out all the pieces to kind of get a feel for whether or not I have everything in the right spot and it's centered on the block. Okay, now I talked about the hand quilting thread, and you would need that to thread your needle. This is a number 90 top stitching needle, which has a nice big eye, but it's still really hard to get this fluffy wool thread through there. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of clip off the end a little, make sure it's not that fuzzy. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but I have taken a loop of this thread And it's the reason you want the hand quilting thread that has the wax coating on it is it's kind of stiff. You can stick a long piece out and it won't flop down on you. And I've lined up both of the loose ends and I've threaded them through my needle, and on the other end I have a loop of thread. And what I'm going to do is take my wool thread and put it through the loop end, and then I'm going to grab the hand quilting thread and I'm going to pull it through, and that threads my needle, and that saves a lot of frustration. So you can just keep that piece of thread close by, and every time you need to rethread, you're good to go. Okay, now it looks like I need a presser foot, and we are ready to stitch. I have my bobbin thread in here already. Like I mentioned before, it's the Aurifil thread. So I'm just going to bring up my bobbin thread and get ready to stitch. So here's my little bird. I've hand stitched already this piece of ribbon around his neck because I wanted those ends to be turned under nicely. And I don't think I want to stitch over that with my wool thread. So I'm just going to start here, and I'm going to go around and stop, and then later I'll tack this down by hand. Okay, so I guess I need to set my machine up here for zigzag. And my width, again, we're going to set at 1.6. And my length we're going to set at about 3. Now you can play around with these numbers, and you might find some numbers on your particular machine that you like better. I have a Bernina, and these numbers work for me pretty good. Make absolutely sure before you start that you have your wide plate on for zigzag. You don't want to do this with a straight stitch plate. Okay, I have my piece pinned in place. I can take those pins out anytime, but I'm going to start by going just as you would any kind of machine applique, one stitch into the fabric and one stitch just off the edge of the fabric. I'm using my my knee lift. A lot of you have newer machines than me, and you have that nice presser foot that lifts up automatically. I don't have that, so I'm using my knee lift to lift my presser foot so I can move easily. Now when you get on a little straight stitch, you can even speed up just a little bit. And now I've come to a little point. This takes some finessing, but a little practice and you'll be able to go around the points just fine. Sometimes I lift up the needle and reposition my fabric just a little bit so that it doesn't go off the fabric. Now I'm not going to bore you with stitching all the way around this bird, but I am going to finish it, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how to do a smaller piece. Okay, we're back, and I've stitched all the way around my pink bird, and I thought you might be interested in what to do with these tails of thread and how to hide those. So I'm going to show you the back, and this will also be an opportunity for you to kind of get an idea of what that zigzag stitch actually looks like. It's a very opened up and loose kind of zigzag. And I know I told you to set it on a 3 for length before. I think anywhere between 2 and 3 millimeters is good, and you can adjust that per your machine. So right here you can see I've tied off by hand those little end pieces there, and these I have yet to tie off, and I wanted to show you how I do that. So I have a little stiletto here, and when you look at this, it's pretty easy to see that thicker thread from the top will form a loop on the back, and you just pull it through with a stiletto. This one is just barely coming through, so you just carefully get in there with your stiletto. Be careful not to split the thread, because it's very easy to split this thread when you're bringing it through. And then all you do after that is just do an overhand knot. I usually do one direction, one the other, and then I clip it about 1/2 inch from the back. So, I'll tie this other one off, and then we're going to sew a small blue piece on the front of this. I'll show you how that's done. Okay, so I have my little blue sawtooth piece down here. I guess it's supposed to be a wing, kind of a strange looking wing, but I'm going to stitch down here, and then I'll show you how we do all these kind of tiny little areas in here. So let's get started. Start on the easy part, right here on the kind of the long part. And it's a good idea to practice the zigzag stitch with your machine a little first and kind of get the feel of where the needle lands. It makes a left swing and a right swing. The right swing should always be just off the edge of the piece of wool that you're stitching on, and the left swing, of course, needs to be in the wool. Take that pin out. So be cognizant of where your needle is when you stop to reposition your fabric. You need to remember, was that last a left swing or a right swing on my needle? So here I'm at the point, and now I just did a right swing. So when I turn this, I know that my needle is going to swing to the left, and I want that to be inside the piece of fabric. So I'm going to do that, but now it's moved a little bit too far from the edge for me. I want to make sure I get that little point tacked down. So what I'm going to do is lift my needle, and that moves it like it's going to go to the right, but it doesn't put it in the fabric yet. Then I'm going to readjust by lifting the presser foot just a little bit where I want that needle to land, and then start off again. Here I am at another corner. I just did a right swing of the needle. I'm going to turn. I'm going to do one left swing into the fabric, and I'm going to turn again. But I know that when it swings right, it's going to land a little too far off my applique piece. So I'm going to just bring the needle up and move it just a tad so that it lands right where I want it to land. So this sounds complicated right now, but you'll get to the point where you'll really be quick at this with a little practice. Okay, I'll do a little bit more of this, and then I will show you a piece that is completed. Completed meaning all the tacking down is done, and it's now ready for the embellishment stitches. You can do really pretty tiny pieces this way, even the little circles that I had on here before. Just going to move that over because I was in the wrong spot, and just move it over. And I'm going to show you a piece that's ready to go. And I'll tell you, I didn't time myself, but I'm guessing that it cut the work time from doing it by hand in at least half, and probably more. So you could spend, on that first block that I showed you could probably spend a good, I don't know, 5 hours maybe, stitching down all those little pieces. So if you could do that in 2 or 2.5, that would be great. You could get on to the fun part. So I'm coming to the end of my little piece here. The key is in that repositioning so that you know exactly where that thread is going to land. You have to get to know your machine really well. And those of you who have the automatic presser foot that lifts when you start to sew, or comes down when you start to sew and lifts when you stop sewing. You may have to go in and turn that off. That's a machine issue, and everybody has a different machine, so I can't address that. Okay, so there's my little blue piece that I attached, and I'll have to go, there's the back, and I'll have to go and pull those threads through and tie them off in the back. Okay, so that's basically it. It's very simple. I have a piece here that I'm going to show you that has not been embellished yet. This is on linen. I like to work on linen rather than wool as a background a lot. And so all of these leaves and these little birds, and these are thistles, were attached by machine, and it didn't take me very long at all. You can see on the back some of the zigzag stitches and where I've tied off. And you really can't tell unless you look really closely any difference between the hand stitching and the machine stitching if you've got a close match in thread. Thanks for watching.